Hello, guys. So it is day two of the summer holidays, and of course, I'm in school. Where else would I be? So I'm going to take a break from endless data analysis to do another one of these talks. I'm going to talk about the feudal system. This is for year 12 for understanding the conquest, William's conquest. Also useful going on into year 13 because the feudal system comes up time and time again when we come to look at William Rufus and reigns of Richard and John in particular. We're going to need to understand how the feudal system works. I'm going to take it for granted that you understand the basics, the king, the barons, the knights, the peasants. If you don't understand this, I have probably just up there somewhere a video of me teaching this to year 7. Have a look at that if you need a refresh on this. I'm hoping that you don't. So anyway, the feudal system at A level, probably the most important thing to understand as a start is, of course, it wasn't called the feudal system. Nobody referred to it as the feudal system until historians a few hundred years ago. William the Conqueror didn't arrive in England and say, right guys, I'm starting the feudal system. This is just a convenient way of classifying this style of government. Of course, it's based the feudal system is based crucially on this system of swearing oaths. So everybody swears an oath to somebody, and ultimately all of this goes up to the king. So there's a connection here between the king, a connection through solemn, solid oath. There's a connection from the king all the way down to everybody, theoretically everybody in the country. And of course, all of the land now under William, theoretically, all of the land belongs to William. This is very different to when we looked at the government administration under Edward, where, of course, Edward is a major landholder, but he doesn't own all of the land. Theoretically, this is William's, and if somebody dies, or if a family is dispossessed, that land reverts automatically to the crown. So this is a huge change, and it's a huge difference for William. I think probably the difficulties people have with feudalism at A level is getting past the language. Once you're past the language, it really is fairly straightforward. So the key vocabulary that you really need to understand is you need to know a vassal. A vassal is the subordinate partner in a feudal relationship, and the lord or overlord is the superior partner in that feudal relationship. The vassal swears homage or homage to their overlord, and this is swearing of fealty, loyalty. They swear this to their overlord. This is called homage, homage, and this is usually, very often, it's a very, very public ceremony. So tied up then with this is they swear homage, and in return for their oath of loyalty, they are going to receive something from their overlord. What they receive is called a fief, and this usually, of course, refers to land. Now, a fief can be anything from a hide, the smallest unit of land, measurable land used in medieval England, all the way up to all of England is a fief at one point. King John famously makes all of England a papal fief. He swears homage to Pope Innocent III, and in doing so, all of England is held as a fief for Innocent at this point. So, and it's from this word fief that we get the word fee, that we get the word fealty. I just said that, didn't I? Fealty. That must also come from here. And of course, it's where we get the word feudalism from. It's from this thing. So a fief is at the center of this. The fief is what you hold, the vassal holds for their overlord. So you need these sort of words: homage, fief. Once you hold a fief, you are enfeoffed. So the subordinate partner, the vassal, is enfeoffed to the overlord, is enfeoffed to their lord. You just need to know this, so when you come to read historians, when you come to read interpretations, you know what they're going on about. If you come across the word enfeoffed and you haven't got a clue what it means, nothing that you read on that page is going to make any sense. Probably the other complicated thing when we're looking at feudalism here is the issue of scutage, and this is another one of the odd words. And all scutage is a tax. I mean, feudalism is really based around taxation. So the idea, as any year 7 can tell you, is that the barons provide knights as protection for the king. Of course, in reality, there are very many times when the king doesn't need knights. He doesn't need this. So instead of this, what he can do is he can raise scutage, and that's a payment for every one of the knights. So instead of paying your king, your overlord, with knights, you can pay him in hard cash. And this is what is used very, very regularly as a method of raising tax. Again, sort of these famous exploiters of the feudal system, like John and Richard, they are raising the scutage far more regularly than their barons would like. And this is one of the major reasons for the barons' revolt in 1215. Again, this is introduced by William I, this idea. It leads to some difficulties with Rufus and Archbishop Anselm over the issue of scutage. Is this in some way, is this simony, however you pronounce it? And so this leads to one of the many reasons why there's conflict between Anselm and Rufus is this issue of scutage and payment. Now I've mentioned the church. Of course, the church is a major landholder. And when if you can probably just see just behind me, look, there's my old feudal system map there for year 7. When we're talking about barons, here in this famous feudal pyramid, we're talking about people who hold their land directly from the king. These people are called the tenants-in-chief. If you've ever rented a flat, then your landlord, you will know that you are the tenant of your landlord. So the vassal is the tenant of the overlord. The tenants-in-chief, these are the people who hold their lands directly from the king. So this is another bit of key vocabulary, the tenants-in-chief directly below the king here. Of course, a number of these tenants-in-chief are churchmen. So when it says here on my old-fashioned pyramid there, barons, that's a little bit misleading, because this can also be, of course it could be princes, princesses, it can also be archbishops are quite regularly tenants-in-chief, so this is important. Also confusing is the business of Normandy and England. So the Duke of Normandy, so after William the Conqueror, the Duke of Normandy is also the King of England. As the Duke of Normandy, so this includes William I, as the Duke of Normandy, he may be the overlord of all of England, but he is also the vassal of the King of France. So you can be both an overlord and a vassal. Are you following? I hope so. This does get tricky now. And this leads to all sorts of confusion and all sorts of difficulty. This is going to spark up enormous sort of troubles in the Angevine period. For those of you in year 13, hopefully you're on top of this by the time you get to year 13. This also causes big problems for the barons immediately following the conquest and going on into William Rufus's reign. If you've got a lord, an overlord in England, you pay homage to William Rufus for your lands in England, but you also have to pay homage to Robert Curthose for your lands in Normandy. You're paying homage to two separate people here. What do you do? I think the barons, there's a famous quote, isn't it? They say something like, how can I possibly support one of my lords, when doing so will betray the other? It's the barons making out it's all so difficult for them, it's so terrible for them. And of course this is just a preamble leading to the rebellions in 1088. So feudalism causing all sorts of problems. So important, I think, just the key points before I talk a little bit about the questions that may come up. Key points, think about, you've got another vocabulary. If you don't understand the vocabulary, you're not going to understand what you're reading. The feudal system also relates to the church. The church are huge landholders during this period. It causes issues with swearing homage to more than one overlord, and it causes issues for the Duke of Normandy being a vassal of the King of France, even though sometimes he's vastly more powerful. Henry II is the vassal of the King of France, despite owning the huge Angevine Empire, of course. So just to talk about questions, obviously we've just had the first year of the new course, and interestingly, one of the change in continuity question that came up was, to what extent did the Norman conquest change government in the urban and rural areas? It's something along these lines, isn't it? How does the conquest change urban and rural areas? It's not a great question, I don't think. I mean, yeah, but that's by the by. But what you've got here is you've got a chance to talk about feudalism in respect to rural areas. So you could be talking about how the introduction of feudalism makes a big impact here, because this creates this whole peasant as a vassal situation. It is similar to the way it existed under the Saxons, but it's much more regimented, and we could certainly talk about this, and then you could talk about how feudalism perhaps doesn't play such a great role in the cities, where it looks nothing like this in the cities, of course. Again, if you're not clear about this, have a look at the Year 7 video where I talk more about this. Previously, so on the old spec, there were a couple of really horrible questions about feudalism. To what extent was England a feudal state by the end of William I's reign? Very, very sort of tricky, difficult to answer. You'd need to be looking at, explaining what feudalism is, and you need to explain the difference again between the towns and the cities, and the sort of indisputable fact that not everybody across the whole country was part of this same feudal system. Certainly, on the borders, in the provinces at the edges, there's always these issues. But hopefully, a question like that won't come up again. When it did come up, the chief examiner's report actually said this was a tricky question to be expecting year 12, year 13 to answer. So fingers crossed. But yeah, this one on urban-rural, it's important to understand that. Crucially, moving from year 12 into year 13, when we're thinking about these issues of homage, particularly then with the expansion of the Angevine Empire, we need our basics. So learn that vocab, go back over it. Feudalism. Cheers. Bye-bye.